I'm Jan Birkett. I'm an actor, and my connection to Northern Stage is that I did my second job here, which was the original version of Animal Farm.
Can you tell us about what your knowledge, if any, is of the history of the building and of Northern Stage?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose I know a snippet of it that I was involved in. But I did come across the company when it was Tyne and Wear Theatre Company, when I was an amateur performer at the Tyne Theatre and Opera House doing musicals. And as a member down there, there was a time, I don't know if this is true or not, but there was some sort of falling out between the Tyne and Wear Theatre Company and the people who owned the Playhouse, and they moved down to the Tyne Theatre. So that was in the late 1980s, I think. And so we occupied the same building, the amateur company and the professional company. So I spent a lot of time in the bar with the stage managers and such like, drinking. And then that sort of didn't work out or something, I don't know, but the company ended up coming back to the Playhouse. So I've kind of been aware of the company since before I was an actor, really. Yeah, and I wasn't someone who was a regular theatre goer. I did lots of stuff when I was an amateur, and through that I got interested in going to the theatre and seeing things, because I wasn't someone brought up to go to the theatre. The school used to take us to see the RSC once a year, and the boys used to all whistle at the ladies' boobs. and that was about my knowledge. I hadn't even been to a panto, So, but I got interested in doing the acting, and then I got interested in watching the acting. So I suppose the first show that I saw in this building was a play that the RSC brought to Newcastle called Singer, and it starred Anthony Sher, about Peter Rachman, the slum landlord in London. Fantastic play by Peter Flannery, he who wrote Our Friends in the North, about corruption, but also about the effects of the Holocaust and about memory, whether it's better to forget trauma or never forget trauma. And Anthony Sher was just absolutely stunning. I mean, he was the baddie, really, I suppose, in the piece. But he just had the audience there, And watching that was really inspiring. So I kind of got, brought into it little by little. Until one day I decided I wanted to be a professional actor. And then just went for it, wrote some letters, and got some auditions. And I got my first job with Northumberland Theatre Company in 1992. And then in 1993, I got my second job with Alan Lydiard here doing Animal Farm. So that's kind of the bit of history I know. I know Andrew McKinnon was the artistic director when they were at the Tyne Theatre and Opera House, but I think he only lasted a couple of years before Alan took over. And then I've sort of followed it since then, from afar, really, I suppose. Haven't worked here for a long time, lived away from Newcastle for a long time. But yeah, I mean, it's got a special place in my heart, this place.
So, well, on that, and can you talk to us about your one? That's amazing. I love Peter Flannery. I love Anthony Sher. I was at the National when Peter Flannery was there, and I got chatting to him and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
What are some of your best, and this could be numerous, it could be one, but what are some of your best memories of the building?
To me, it was a place when Alan Lydiard was running it.
So sorry, could you start that answer again?
Yeah.
Someone just came
Okay. There they go again. Have they gone? For me, it represented this building. When I came into it, I mean, I was an absolute novice. I'd done pretty big things. I'd appeared in front of 1,100 people at the Tyne Theatre and Opera House all the time. The first thing I ever did was Man of La Mancha. I was the innkeeper's wife, and I had one line. But basically, getting into this building, when I was cast from an open audition, and I went along to this audition not even knowing properly what an audition really was. And it was with Frank McConnell, who was a choreographer, and Alan Lydiard. And I just remember they had us doing all kinds of drama exercises that I'd never come across before. And I just kind of thought, oh, this is fun. So did them. And then I heard I'd been cast in Animal Farm. And coming into this building, it was a place of real excitement. There was a real buzz about it. And for me, it was an absolute eye-opener that theatre could be like that. That Animal Farm, you know, that we were going to perform it in mud, and that the set would consist of a bath of water, a piano, and some light bulbs, and some crates and things lying about, and some suitcases. That was it, basically. It was just such an amazing time. And I think what Alan did, and he has to be given credit for this, is that he had real ambition for this building. And he wanted theatre that was centred in Newcastle, but that was broad, ambitious, outward-looking, but it still had a stamp of authenticity, of Geordie culture to it. He was interested in real people on stage, and actually that's probably the reason I got cast, because he kind of liked the idea, and it's a bit of a myth really, but he liked the idea that he could pick people off the street and he'd get the authentic thing on stage, that all this acting nonsense, you didn't need training, and luckily I didn't have any, so, you know, I was probably the perfect candidate. So for me, when I came in here initially, it was excitement, it was feeling at home. You know, we all socialised in the bar all the time. And, you know, when I was invited to join the ensemble, a lot of actors in the Northeast at that time had sort of, everyone knew about it, that the ensemble was coming, and everybody was thinking, would they want to do it? And a lot of people didn't want to. They just thought, oh, God, no, I'm not going to be pinned down to a single company of actors. You know, that's really boring. I'll be stopped from doing all sorts of things. But for me, it was just like, wow, you know, this will be a fantastic experience. And initially it was. It was really fantastic.
So how long were you in the ensemble? How old were you? How long were you in the ensemble? And could you tell us a bit more about your experience? It started fantastically. How did it develop?
Yeah. I think I was certainly in my late 30s. I was maybe even 40 when I joined the ensemble. I'd done other things in between that. I'd done a Christmas show and something else, I think. But then I joined the ensemble, and it was, I thought, a real privilege and a chance to really learn, and it felt international. And it felt like we were going to go out, and I mean, Alan was great at raising funds from the British Council to take work out. So, you know, we took Animal Farm on a tour of Holland. We took it over to Turkey, which was amazing. We took it to Northern Ireland. We took it to Derry, actually, which was really scary because we had guns in the show. And in Derry at the time, I don't know if you remember it, but there was this trick-or-treat murder that happened. It was a pub just outside of Derry in a village, and the gunman went to the pub, it was on Halloween, and they said trick-or-treat, and then they opened fire and killed people in this pub. This happened while we were in Derry, and the atmosphere in Derry at the time was really not nice. And I just remember we had a schools performance, and there were all these kids in, and Animal Farm, you know, the way it began was very quiet, you know. And did those feet in ancient times? And we'd all come on as these downtrodden refugees with our suitcases. And then Napoleon would sit down and he'd start telling the story. It all began very quietly. We all peeled off our outer garments and we had these very attractive damart type underwear underneath. We all washed ourselves in the bath of water on the stage, and as the story was unfurling. And when it got to the bit about the revolution on the farm, this music kicked in that was so loud. And kids used to, you know, they come in for a schools performance and they're a bit, And then this music would kick in and you could sort of see them go, whoa, and we would all be flying across the stage and doing all this stuff. And it was amazing. I loved performing that show to kids. But in Derry, the first time the shotgun went off in this one school's performance, a little lad who was sat on the aisle hit the deck. He literally, and suddenly we all thought, oh God, yeah, guns are a real thing here, you know. So yeah, it was a very edgy show. So that was one of the things we did. But also we got to collaborate with all sorts of people. On A Clockwork Orange, Mark Murphy from Vitol Dance Company was the choreographer, but he was also a filmmaker as well. And he now does massive things like opening ceremonies for City of Culture and all that sort of thing. Really clever bloke. And you know, we were doing all this filming, this guerrilla filming. And it was all a bit macho, to be quite honest, but it was, you know, the lads went off because they were being the droogs, you know, the bad lads. And so Mark would take them off in an old Mini or something that they'd got hold of. And they would just do guerrilla filming round the city and stuff. And then it was projected onto the screen. And we all had this choreography to do, Mark's choreography. The design on it, I mean, Neil, who was Alan's designer, Neil Murray, fantastic designer. So it was really out there. And there were these huge, great screens on stage that moved around on casters. And we used to have to stand on top of them while it was spun round and stuff. It was so exciting, you know. And just kind of, you knew that you were doing really good and interesting work. Some less successful than others, I have to say. I think the Romeo and Juliet was a concept too far, let's say. Alan wanted to do it that we all had learning disabilities. So the setup was, it was called a factory Romeo and Juliet. So the setup was going to be that we were all working in this nondescript factory, and we all had learning disabilities. But then he settled for only Romeo and Juliet would have the learning disabilities, which actually could work as an idea. And that they got so involved in the story, these factory workers were going to do Romeo and Juliet. And these two young people with learning disabilities got so involved in the story, it actually became a real story and a real tragedy, which was a nice concept. But Alan sort of rewrote Shakespeare a little bit for the show. And I was playing Vanessa in the factory, and then a single parent Montague. So there was only me, there was no father Montague, so I had Montague's lines. And so we started the show all coming into the factory, and we were these really rough people in this factory. And I think I had, if I remember rightly, I had the first line in the show, and it was to Tony Nielsen, who was playing Capulet. But we were in our guises as factory workers, and I strode in and shouted across the stage. I'm not sure if I can say this. Twat! And it's like I could almost hear Shakespeare turning in his grave. So it was a concept that kind of worked, but didn't. I mean, it was a bit like the Anne Frank story. I mean, I think. Our Juliet drank bleach, I think, in the end, to kill herself. And it was like, there were comments shouted from the audience about drink the bleach, So, the school's performances. So not everything was a total success. But you had to admire Alan's ambition. The shows were notable, if not your taste or whatever. They were different. They were... they were conceptual and challenging, actually. And I liked that.
And did you have any other times, did you work outside of the ensemble?
I did the odd day, because I was in Byker Grove at the time, so I used to get the odd bit of time off to do that. But no, it wasn't really part of the deal. I had that job before I joined the ensemble, which is why I was allowed. But Alan wasn't happy about it. No, you were expected to dedicate yourself to the ensemble. And actually, a bit like a kind of, member of a cult, I was kind of into that. I was quite happy to devote myself to it because I really believed in the concept of it. And I raised some money, I remember, from the Arts Council to take the whole company down to London to see Pina Bausch's company, Tanztheater Wuppertal. And they were doing a show called Victor. And I knew that Alan was a big fan of her work. And so it would kind of inform what we all did. And so I raised this money and got us all bussed down to London so we could go and see the show and stuff, But I think one of the downsides of the ensemble, if I was going to give you any downsides, would be that Alan expected too much of us all. I remember being absolutely exhausted one day because not only were we doing shows, but we were doing research and development and all of this. And there was a woman who was at the university and was researching a new play. It was in development, and she wanted to perform it to us. And he called us in at something like 9 o'clock in the morning or something after a show night, to kind of come and see this show and sort of participate in. And I was just walking into the building, kind of dragging my feet, a bit tired, And it was like he came up and said, "Oh, Jan, are you all right?" And I just said, "Oh, I'm just a bit tired, Alan." And he went, "Well, you've got to show commitment, if you want to." And I went, "Hang on a minute. You asked me how I was, and I'm telling you I'm a bit tired. If you don't want to know that, please don't ask." And it was a bit like that. It was sort of, he got a bit maniacal about the ensemble. It was his baby. And I remember him saying to us all one day, Lev Dodden's company, they come into the rehearsal room in the morning and they sweep the rehearsal room and then they give Lev Dodden flowers. And we all just burst out laughing. It's like, "Oh, is that what you're expecting? Because I'm afraid it's not going to happen." We're Geordies, But yeah, I think he had that very, intense feeling that European theatre can. I mean, Lev Dodden's company, they have the luxury of rehearsing for a year to do a play, and they keep it in their repertoire for 20 years, and different people do the parts and all of that, and they treat everything with a kind of reverence. And I did have a certain reverence for what we were doing, and especially when I worked with Peter Brook, when his company came and we did a workshop with Yoshi Aida, I think he's called, who was in his company at the time. Which was kind of like reverential. It was like a religious experience almost. They take it really, really seriously. But I think, with a company as mixed as ours was, I think it needed a bit of lightheartedness as well. And Alan was a tricky man to work with. He was volatile in his moods, and I found that oppressive in the end. I found I don't like to be dictated to. And also I don't like to feel like a puppet on stage, which quite often Alan made you feel like a puppet. We used to say, we had this saying, 2 inches is a long way in theatre, because you'd be standing on the stage and you go, no, 2 inches. And it was like, that was how exact. And yeah, it was because he had an amazing picture in his head of how the stage needed to look. But at times you felt you had no agency in your work. And for me personally, that wasn't comfortable. And some people dealt with it and stayed for years with the ensemble, but I left after 7 months. Yeah.
That's literally my pet peeve of acting altogether. Would you just do it then?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you left after 7 months.
I left after 7 months. I was the first person to leave, and then I think, who left after me? I think it was maybe Maggie. In fact, I think Rebecca was the only woman who lasted any length of time, because Joey left soon after that as well. I think the men, weirdly, found the hierarchy easier to deal with than the women did in a lot of ways, because, of course, we were right at the bottom of it. I think it was an incredibly male-orientated atmosphere. Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to use the word misogynistic, but there was definitely, well, I'll tell you a story to illustrate. When they did A Clockwork Orange the first time, I wasn't in it. It was before the ensemble when they first did it. And the woman who played the writer's wife has to get gang raped by the Droogs. And I went to see that play and I was absolutely disgusted by it because the actress who was being raped, it was an 11-minute scene of rape, but it had no violence in it, really. She had this purple ruched gown on, and one of the Droogs held one arm and one of the Droogs held the other arm, and they literally, it was Velcroed, and the dress tore up the middle. And so this actress was just totally bare to the audience, and she was kept like that for like 11 minutes. And I thought that was incredibly about titillation rather than what rape really means. So when Alan asked me to do The Writer's Wife, when we did A Clockwork Orange as part of the ensemble, we had a meeting in the bar to talk about it. And I said, I'll do it, but I'm not doing the rape scene the way you did it the last time. And he went, oh, what do you mean, And I told him, and I said, rape is about violence. And, I want it to be violent. I don't want it to titillate the audience in any way. I want them to be shocked by it. That's how I saw the film Clockwork Orange when I was 17, and I nearly left the theatre because it was so shocking. And our show needed to be that shocking. And so we argued it back and forth. And then he agreed that, okay, we wouldn't do it like that. But all the way through rehearsal, he kept going, Jan, if your dress was just, if it fell open a bit, if it just... I'd go, no, Alan, no, we're not doing that. And it was so funny because when we did the final scene, it was amazing. It was brilliant. Mark Murphy helped to choreograph it. And it was like on the bed, and they were literally punching me, and I was fighting back. I had stilettos on. I was kicking out, and she never fought back or anything. And then all the lads, of course, when it came to the rape, they all had to get their pants down. So all the lads, and it was so sweet because some of them were still quite young, and they were like all a bit embarrassed about it. And I thought, well, there you go. That's what women have to deal with all the time, getting their kit off. My kit didn't come off. The Velcro occasionally would come a bit undone but there was none of that. I was not on show because they were on top of me simulating rape, and it was their bottoms that were on show, basically. And they were very, very shy about it. And I felt sorry for them, but I thought, no, I'm standing by what I'm saying here. And actually, it was so much more effective for that. It was so shocking. So, you have to stand your ground a bit. But I think in the end... the women were outnumbered in the company quite heavily, 4 women to 9 men. And there was just, as time went on, it was just a very macho kind of atmosphere. And also there was a sort of split in the men between people who took their art very seriously and people who didn't, but were still great, and just different methods, and we all had to do a joint warm-up all the time. And we used to take turns leading the warm-up. And this is where the trouble started, which I believe you've already heard about, So there were differences, etc.
We haven't heard about that bit of it, so go on. In the
Well, there was a contingent who would say, shout at other people going, focus, 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 And then, well, I'm sure Joey won't mind me saying this, but then there's Joey, who's a chatterbox, and her idea of a warm-up is we all sit in a circle and have a chat, and she does a bit of a stretch while she chatters on. And, that works for her. And for me, it depends on the show, but like Animal Farm, you needed a thorough physical warm-up. Otherwise, you were going to kill yourself. But certain shows, sometimes you like a more meditative warm-up or something like that, but you weren't free to do that. You had to do whatever the group was doing. And I think the tyranny of a group can get to you in a company. And I think, there was no allowance made for that people have different ways of getting there. We all get there, but we all have different methods. So that was bound to create friction. So yeah, there was that. And you know, on tour as well, and I don't want to say too much, but you know, I don't want to tell tales, but yeah, it could get tense.
Yeah, there's big pay dispute that led to a scrap. Yeah. Uh, so, I mean, you kind of covered it. My next question, but just in case there's anything else that it sort of unleashed in here. Any other challenges that you faced being here? The ones you.
Um, I mean, the good challenges were that I learnt so much. I had no idea physical theatre even existed. And I'm not dead sporty or anything, but bloody hell was I fit during that period. Because, I mean, I had to lift a big pallet from the ground and put it over my head like this and spin around with it. And, you know, the actual, just the physicality of doing that. My back, I had muscles all down my back. I've never had that. So, you know, the fitness thing and the learning of, I think the big challenge was Alan wasn't great at communicating what he actually wanted from you, but he knew what he wanted. And it was kind of how you got there to understand what it was he did want. And I, having come from, you know, doing amdrams and not having had a lot of experience, I was doing naturalism all the time. And Alan's work is not about naturalism. It's about declaration on stage, you know, standing there, declaiming. It's not necessarily about physical closeness when you're being close with another character. So you have to find a way to communicate that without the naturalism, if you like. And that was quite a learning curve for me because I was a novice and I just hadn't come across it before. So it took me a while to kind of click into that. But that was good because I learned such a lot. And just from seeing other companies, I mean, I loved the fact that all those foreign companies came to Newcastle. And I loved it that we could all use Geordie accents on stage, but we weren't doing kitchen sink drama. I absolutely loved that. And I think that's, you know, I think one of your questions is about the future, about what should be the ambitions of the theatre. And I think there's a gap in Newcastle about what kind of theatre we can watch. So you've got live theatre, which is your new Wrighton House. Now you've got Alphabetti as well, who great venue for young companies coming through and all of that. You've got the Theatre Royal that nowadays is only interested in the big musicals or a very starry cast. They'll occasionally do a play if there's a very starry cast, but that's it. And I think Newcastle needs a theatre where we can see classical works, modern classics, but still root it in our city by developing local talent, by having local actors doing it, by looking for work with massive themes. I mean, you know, stage one is a bit of a white elephant, to be quite honest. It's a very, very wide stage. And you've got to fill it with something. And some directors haven't quite got that. And I think you can't just put a studio piece that was done in a pub in London on that big stage and expect it to work. You've got to have ambition and breadth of ambition and a bloody good designer and spectacle at times, but not always, but just, you know, big themes. And I think there's so many classical works and new works as well, but you know, meaty stories, you know, that we can tell on that big stage. And, you know, if I was going to be an artistic director, I think that's what I would be aiming for. Yeah, and I wish Natalie all the best, and I hope, you know, she enjoys her time here and gets to do that, you know, because Newcastle needs it. We need it. And this theatre is hidden now behind another big building. We've got to get it out there, you know. We've got to take our rightful place in this city, and then we've got to go outwards and look outwards.
So why is, and you touched on it there, why do you think this theatre is important for the city and for the region?
I think every city needs a theatre like this. And we are missing out in Newcastle at the minute. We're missing out on a lot of things, and you know, it's a decent big venue that we could have big shows at, and the cultural life of a city is so important, and it's important not only as entertainment, it's important for the economic development of a city. So if you've got a city that's got a vibrant cultural life, businesses will bring their people here. Why did the BBC move to Manchester? Because they knew it was going to be a hub. There was going to be things happening there. And we missed out. Newcastle missed out now. And that's a shame because now on the BBC, the north is Manchester. And they've forgotten that there's actually the northeast, which is a whole different thing. And we have to make our stamp on the city. I think Liverpool does it well. They've got a set of theatres in Liverpool that seem to cover everything. And I think we can do the same here. And it's vital for the life of the city, I think. Yeah.
After you left the ensemble, did you work here again?
No.
No, that was your...
I never wanted to work with Alan again after... I mean, he eventually, many years later, apologised to me. But no, I would not have considered working with him again.
That's why you left?
It was a build-up. As I say, I didn't like the atmosphere, the way we were being treated. I don't know how much of this I can say. I don't want to libel Alan in any way. But he would bully people. Not me. He also could be a little inappropriate with women. And you kind of watch all this, and there was a younger actress in the company who was fresh from drama school, and she was the one who had to have her breasts bared when Alex is getting his, his treatment by the psychologists. And she was very nervous about this, and I tried to support her in that. And then he would pick on her a lot, and he had this thing. He would have a whipping boy in the room, in the rehearsal room, and many directors do this. It's quite common, actually. They're in a bad mood that day. Somebody's going to get it in the room. And I remember, describing it as, it's like living with an abusive father. You're walking on eggshells. You don't know who's going to get it today. And because I'd been quite firm with him at times, he didn't really do that to me. But we were working with a Spanish director, we were doing a workshop on the grotesque, which was to feed into A Factory Romeo and Juliet, the characters we were going to develop for that. And as I say, we were all in the room, the whole company was in the room, and we were doing all these different, trying out scenes, doing different exercises.